Chapter 21 Idiots. Abigail's Point of View. Ugh. As I sat up in my bed, I let out a groan. It had been a stressful 2 weeks and recent events hadn't made it any easier. I had been wholly unprepared for anyone to visit and hadn't had anything set up for guests. We barely had enough time to move a table and chairs into the cabin for a place to talk. This entire tutorial was pushing my boundaries and I couldn't handle all the stress. Coming up with things for Anna and Josh to do, making plans and keeping track of everyone in the family, making sure we had enough food for dinner and everything else. It was an extremely stressful time and it was bordering on being worse than when I finished my nursing degree. That had been a whirlwind of studying for finals while working to pay for college with the added benefit of internships to pad my resume. The only good thing going for me so far was I wasn't in charge of making the decisions. Granddad had stepped up and took care of most decision-making and had people decide where the executive approach wouldn't work. Then it would be up to me to plan it out. Who would forage for food, who would scout the forest, who would work on building shelter, and who was in charge of cooking. I swear the next person to ask me for anything better have a damn good reason. I had to wake up earlier than most to make sure that breakfast was being prepared, and if it wasn't, either prepare it myself or wake up the person who was supposed to be doing it. I did my best to exit the tent silently without waking Jonathan or the kids, but the close proximity made it difficult. I made it out without waking any of them, fortunately, and was relieved to find Sam and Ashley up already working on breakfast. It gave me one less thing to deal with and let me focus toward the plans for the day. Labor schedules were easier now than in the beginning because most everyone was working on the trench with only a few people doing something else. Kyle mainly was out in the woods searching for plants to add to our diet while 1 or 2 others scouted. We had sent scouts out every day and nothing changed, but Granddad was adamant about doing it, so it was done. I thought it would be better to use the manpower elsewhere, but he disagreed. The scouts were keeping track of the bear in the woods along with noting anything else that changed. Lately, they had said there had been a decline in the amount of boars near the camp and a scout found a body of one that had been picked at by different animals. I had a sneaking suspicion about whose fault that was, but I didn't say anything. That was another thing that I didn't have time to worry about. Chris and his partner in crime Austin, running off every morning to God knows where to do God knows what. I knew that Chris felt like we needed to do more and level up quicker, but there wasn't much more I could do in the day. I was spread thin already as it was. He and Austin would come back around breakfast soaking wet with scratches and scrapes that I have to heal, but they never tell me what happened. It was a good way to level up, and I had recently hit level 6 the other day after healing a particularly bad wound that Austin had. I didn't know who they think they were fooling because most people knew they were out there doing something, and if their glaring absence in the morning didn't give them away, their levels did. They were the only people at level 7, and it was painfully obvious that they were up to something, but no one said anything. They weren't coming back with anything too bad of an injury, and I healed them up before anyone could see them too closely. But people weren't stupid. I wanted to use my buffing skill on them before they left, but they said it wasn't necessary, and since it didn't last very long it wouldn't be very helpful. I wanted to buff them so they wouldn't get as hurt out fighting, but a part of it was so that I would be considered contributing to their fight and get some points. I wasn't hurting from points or anything, but after Chris said he was over halfway to buying a skill, it made me realize how far behind I was. Taking care of 2 kids costs more than anticipated. I couldn't let them eat nothing but meat, so John and I split the cost of buying some fruits and vegetables so they could have a balanced diet. We also caved and bought some sweets so they could have something nice. Josh absolutely loved the furs and thought they were cool, but Anna thought they were rough and scratchy, so we had to buy a blanket for her to sleep at night. Little things here and there added up, and at this rate, it would take a few weeks to be able to afford a skill. I also had to think about what profession I wanted to get and plan some time in the day in order to practice doing it. Scott and a few others were still going through the carpentry book, and none of them had unlocked the profession yet. Scott was the closest, but that was because he spent almost every waking moment either reading the book or practicing what was written. After Derek died, he threw himself into work and spent all his time doing something with his hands, trying to keep his mind occupied. Diana was the exact opposite. She was a shell of her former self and spent most of the time sleeping. No one had the heart to tell her not to. We went over when we could to comfort her, but I don't think it did much. She lost her only child, and I couldn't even imagine losing Anna or Josh. I don't know if I would be able to do it. I brought her meals to make sure that she ate something, but there was nothing I could do to make her feel better. The only thing that could help now was time. Banishing the dark thoughts, I got ready for the day and made sure that everything was ready for breakfast. I did my daily search through the store to see if anything was new and prepared myself for the day to come. Before I could walk over and help with preparing the food, Austin came up to me looking like he just finished running a marathon. He was sweaty and out of breath and looked like he was about to pass out. That said nothing of the blood that covered him. "I need you to follow me," he said while still trying to catch his breath. I didn't know what was happening, but I nodded and started to follow him toward the gate. He wasn't running, so it couldn't be anything life-threatening. Chris wasn't with him, and that wasn't a good sign. What if he's not running because Chris is already dead? My thoughts started to spiral, but before it got too bad, Austin led me right outside the gate where Chris was lying on the ground not moving. I immediately checked for a pulse and let out a relieved sigh when I found one. He was still alive, just unconscious. As I looked him over, I couldn't help but notice the amount of wounds he had on his body. I didn't have the body scan skill like Sam had, but I could clearly see all the different cuts on his body. Most had already scabbed over, but some were still leaking blood. I used healing hands on him as soon as I touched him and looked him the rest of the way over so I wouldn't miss anything that could be wrong. Taking his armor off was difficult, but Austin helped lift it off of him, and it showed a few bruises but nothing too bad. After I had done a thorough once-over, I kept my skill going and looked up at Austin. "Explain." I didn't yell, but it was clear that I wasn't very happy right now. Austin knew better than to mess with me and went right into the story. "We were out hunting this morning, and after seeing the guy with a higher level than us, we started hunting higher-level boars. At first, it went fine and we could kill them with little difficulty, but that all changed when we tried killing a level 10 boar." He was talking fast, trying to get through the story, and stopped to take a breath. "We knew it wasn't the smartest idea, but we tried anyway, and it was way stronger than we thought it was. It had earthen armor that we couldn't get through, and all our normal attacks didn't do anything. After we realized that we couldn't damage it, we knew that we had to outlast it while chipping away at its armor." This story was already off to a bad start, and Chris was in for the dressing down of his life when he woke up. We fought for almost half an hour and eventually managed to get through. I severed an artery with my spear, and that's when it all went wrong. We were already tired, and the boar knew it was going to die, so it tried its hardest to take us with it. That's when Chris did something I didn't know was possible and managed to cut off its leg while it was facing me. He must have used everything he had because he passed out right after. The boar died soon after, and I carried him back here. He finished his story pointing at Chris lying on the ground. There was so much that I wanted to comment on, but I focused on Chris to make sure that he was healed completely. It looked like he was just tired and needed time to rest, and the story confirmed it, but I needed to make sure. After a few casts of healing hands, all of his wounds closed, and all that was left was the semi-dried blood that covered his clothes. A quick cast of cleanse got rid of that, and he looked good as new. There were still holes and tears in his clothes, but those were already there, and there was nothing I could do about that. "All right, your turn. Sit down." After Chris was fine, it was time to heal Austin. He had the same kind of wounds as Chris did, and he was actually a little worse off than Chris. His arms had way more cuts than Chris's and looked like he had more blood covering him. Not long after I healed Austin up, I could hear light snores coming from him, showing just how tired he was. It must have taken everything in him to carry Chris back after the fight they had. I just stood there looking over the two idiots and didn't know what to do. My mother instincts were telling me to scold them and make them stop this insanity, but I knew that wouldn't do anything. Chris hated being told that he couldn't do something, and most of the time would do it just to spite you. If I told him he couldn't continue to do this, he would ignore me and do it anyways. He wasn't a kid anymore, and I had to trust that he would be all right. "You're going to be the death of me." I knew that he couldn't hear me, but I said it to him anyway. He always had a way of making me worry about him that I couldn't get over. He hid most of the more crazy things he did from our parents, and since I was a sibling, instead he had no problem regaling me in his stupid stories. I just hoped that he wouldn't do anything stupid. Based on the way he handled Anna and Josh, he would be a great dad, and I would hate to see that not come true. I couldn't do anything more for them but leave them to rest. I would have Jonathan carry them back to their tents because there was no way I was able to carry them. Walking away, I couldn't help but think one last time, idiots. Chapter 22, Uncommon. I woke with a start. I shot up out of bed and surveyed my surroundings. Wait, bed? The last thing I remembered was cutting the boar's leg off. How did I end up in my bed? My armor was gone, and all I was wearing were my underclothes that had seen better days. They were sweat-stained and dirty, with holes and tears all over them. I bought a second pair of clothes so I could alternate days while washing them, but wear and tear had its way with these. I didn't want to spend the points to get new ones, and I would wait until these were falling off until I replaced them. The increased frequency of battles lately didn't help matters, but oh well, it's worth it. It took a few moments, but I calmed down from waking up not where I remembered being and checked myself over for injuries. I took quite a few during the battle, and if I left them be, I would be in trouble. Looking myself over, I saw that everything was healed up nicely and only faint white scars were left. Abigail must have healed me. There was no way my body would have healed that fast. My increased vitality made healing much quicker, but there was no way that it was that fast. The only way it could have healed naturally was if a few days had passed. I checked the timer until the end of the tutorial to check how much time had passed and was relieved to know it had only been a few hours. My body was stiff and reluctant to move, but I rolled out of bed regardless. My axe and shield were at the foot of the bed, and I picked them up to inspect them. They were similar to my armor in that they needed some love and care. My axe was not as sharp after chopping all that wood, and swinging it against hard-packed earth didn't help matters. It had chips and burrs running the length of the edge, and I didn't think it could cut through much of anything. There was nothing I could do about it, though, and I would have to work with what I had. Buying new gear was expensive, and to replace my axe would be around 100 points, which I didn't want to spend. I was so close to getting a skill with the points I saved up, and I wasn't going to blow them on a new axe just yet. So what if it was a little blunt? It would still get the job done. The shield was in a similar state from all the attacks I had blocked with it. Before I was as good at deflecting attacks as I was now. There were a few that it took head-on. Some of the wood was chipped and the metal embossment in the center was dented. It would last longer than my axe would, but not much longer after that. We needed a blacksmith or something to do some much-needed repairs on our gear. Plus, it would make it last longer if it was regularly serviced. Blacksmithing is something I could do. I wasn't inclined to sit over a cauldron for hours at a time brewing potions, and I didn't want to be a carpenter. I'd leave that to the others. Enchanting was what I really wanted, but blacksmithing and enchanting kind of went hand in hand. I wonder if I could do both. There had to be a way to combine professions like there was a way to combine classes. Alchemist and gardener had to have some overlap where you could do both, the same with tailor and leatherworker. After looking over my gear, my stomach made itself known, and I realized that I hadn't eaten anything yet. The level 10 boar was the last thing we were going to fight before coming back, and it had been a few hours since then. Everyone was probably starting work right now, and I was going to be late. Before I left my tent to get some food, I noticed that I had a notification pending. I must have leveled up from the fight. As I was opening it, I expected the usual level up spiel, but was surprised that it wasn't a level that I got. It was a skill upgrade. You have upgraded a skill. Power Strike. Common. Dash. Heavy Blow. Uncommon. I didn't even know you could do that. It must have been from pushing the skill past what it was meant to be able to do. I put everything into it, making it the heaviest blow I had made thus far in the tutorial. The system must have agreed and named it Heavy Blow. Heavy Blow. Uncommon. Moderately enhances the next blow for an increase of strength. The description was lackluster, and I noticed that there were a few changes from Power Strike's description. It got rid of the mana part and just said enhances without saying what it enhanced it with, and there was the added modifier of moderately. It looked like a straight-up upgrade, but I wouldn't know for sure until I tested it. My stomach was really getting angry at me now, so I closed the window and exited my tent. Everyone was already out working, and there were only a few people left in camp to clean up after the meal. Abigail noticed me immediately and came stomping over toward me. Oh shit. That did not look like a happy face, and I could only think of how she felt looking at my unconscious body covered in blood. In my defense, most of it wasn't mine, but I didn't think stating that would help. I started to back away and increase the distance between us, but that just made her walk faster. No, I wasn't running from my sister. I just knew what she was going to say, and it wasn't going to be a fun conversation. I was just saving us both from the need to have it, no other reason. Christopher Taylor Zelensky, you better stay right there, she half yelled. Oh, she full named me. This was worse than I thought. Abigail always had a habit of playing my second mother. It got worse after she had children of her own. I tried to disillusion her with that idea by telling her all the stupid things I had done to try and get her to stop, but it never did. I didn't know why I thought that it would get her to stop, but I did. I even told her about that one time I drove backward all the way to high school because a friend of mine said I couldn't do it. I had a bad habit that once I heard the magic words, it was game on. I bet you can't, or any variation of that were my kryptonite. Since she was hellbent on giving me a piece of her mind, I stopped and decided to take it like a man, agreeing with everything she said to make her stop quicker. You have no idea how worried I was when I saw you, you stupid idiot. Think before you act. Make better choices. What would have happened if you lost? Promise you won't do something so stupid again. The rant was a lot longer than that, but that was the gist of what she said. It might not have been in those exact words, and if a nun was here she would have fainted. But the point was clear. I spent the next 10 minutes placating her and agreeing that it was a stupid decision and would think it through next time. Through all the word games and convolution that I took the conversation in, she didn't notice I never promised not to do it again. I didn't know if it was a silly sense of pride or something else, but I always kept my promises, and I would be lying if I said I wouldn't do it again. Ever since we were young, my dad always held us to our promises. Even if they were made in a joking manner, it didn't matter. He would say a person should be held to what they say, and it had rubbed off on me over the years. After she had said what she wanted to say, she had calmed down and wasn't talking as loud. Oh, and I saved you some food for breakfast so you can eat it before gonna help dig. You're all healed up and have no excuses not to. It's not like you want to tell everyone you're injured from fighting, right? Abigail smirked before walking off. Oh, that devil. She knew I didn't want everyone to know about my morning activities and was using that fact to punish me. My body still hurt from the fight, and the thought of spending all day digging made me want to crawl back in bed. I brushed away that urge and resigned myself to my fate. If you're gonna be dumb, you better be tough. Or so they say. It was hell. My body ached. My hands hurt. And I was pretty sure I couldn't lift my arms over my head. But I did it. I took to digging with the same intensity as the previous days and worked my butt off trying to convince everyone I was fine. They were worried that I was sick or something from sleeping in, and I kept telling them I was fine. Austin thought it was the funniest thing in the world with me being constantly asked if I was okay and kept antagonizing me about it. He would say, "You're working slower than usual? Are you sure you're fine? Or you're sweating a lot? Maybe you have a fever." I didn't say anything back, but he better be ready for payback when the shoe was on the other foot. I fell asleep almost as soon as I laid down and was out like a light. Waking up so early was tough, but I was getting used to it by now. The training notifications helped. Seeing visible progress has a way of motivating you. My strength continued its climb to 30, with endurance and fortitude joining in on the fun. No magic increases this time, but that was to be expected. I couldn't have the exhaustion from using mana and be as tired as I was while working. I had to limit my mana usage or I might have passed out again. It's good to push your body, but if I did more than that, it wouldn't have been training anymore. It would be a detriment. That just meant I had to focus on them today. Austin met me at the usual spot and we made our way into the forest. After a minute of walking, Austin broke the silence. "I didn't think I would see you today. You looked half dead yesterday," he said. "A little tiredness isn't going to stop me. Plus, I feel a level up today. After the bore, I feel like we're close to level 8. I said back. "Me too. I don't know how, but I feel like I'm close as well," he said back. Knowing that we were both close to a level up, we picked up our pace a little and eagerly searched for prey. After the disaster of a fight yesterday, I had finalized the new skill I was going to pick and wanted it as soon as possible. What I didn't say was after yesterday I had over 900 points, and after the hunt today, I should have enough to buy a skill. I would get 2 in one day and I couldn't wait. Also, I was itching to test my new skill out, and fighting was the perfect way to see how much better it would be. I couldn't use it yesterday because I didn't know if there would be a visual change that would alert others. I would tell them eventually, but after the amount of concern and probing questions yesterday, I didn't want to add to the trouble. It increased in rarity and I was like a child before Christmas. I wanted to use it now. It didn't take long to find our first victim, and I finally got the chance to test out my new skill. I didn't want to mess up the test, so had to make sure that the boar was as healthy as it could be. Let's not throw javelins at it this time, I want to test something. Let me get the first hit, I said to Austin. He gave me a questioning look but nodded. It was a level 6 boar, so it wasn't like we had to use our opening salvo. I ran toward my target and started activating my skill. The boar noticed and charged at me as well. As we got closer and closer, I started really pouring in the mana for the skill. It felt bottomless compared to Power Strike. I could tell that it was taking something else too besides the mana. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was taking mana in addition to something else. Both the energies added together and the glowing of my axe intensified. It kind of looked like a weak lightsaber by this point. Eventually, it stopped taking mana at about 5 times as much as the previous skill, and that said nothing of the other energy mixed into the skill. Since the boar was so kind enough to charge me head first, I thought it nice to give it a little present for being so nice. Instead of using my shield to stop its charge, I brought my axe down right onto the top of its head. What followed was unexpected and caused me to stumble after my swing. As soon as the axe made contact, all of the energy in the axe transferred into the boar. Explosively. Its head exploded in a spray of gore that covered me head to toe, and its headless body embedded itself into the dirt, coming to a dead stop. Dead stop. I just stood there incredulously staring at my axe like it was a mighty artifact. Hot damn, what was that? Austin shouted behind me. You know how yesterday when I took the boar's leg off, my swing was a lot more powerful than it should have been? I said, still staring at my axe. Yeah, I saw. You did something that I didn't think was possible. It was kind of hard to miss, he said back. Well, it caused my skill to upgrade, and that was me testing it, I said back, finally turning to see his face. He looked at me like I was crazy, opening and closing his mouth before he finally said, That was only one skill? I thought you managed to buy another one and combined them or something. He didn't know whether to cry or celebrate. He then launched into an investigation of how exactly I did what I did so that he could replicate it. I didn't hold anything back and told him everything about how I did it. He was my friend, and I wanted to see him succeed as well. As we made our way toward more boars, all I could hear was him muttering obscenities mixed with calling me a lucky son of a bitch. You win some and you lose some. He'll get over it. Chapter 23 Decisions. I reached level 8 not long after the first kill, and Austin soon followed. For my new skill, I picked Penetrating Strike, Common. Penetrating Strike, Common. Enhances the next strike with mana, increasing the ability to penetrate thick hide and armor. I needed something that could get through armor, and this skill was perfect. I didn't know the exact difference between this one and Piercing Strike, but I figured either would work. Piercing sounded more like a spear skill and penetrating more like a blunt weapon skill, and that was what my axe effectively was now. But it didn't much matter to me. I tested it throughout the day, and it worked like a charm. Where my axe only sank a couple of inches into the skin of a boar, this skill would bury the axe head deep into muscle. It worked great, and I knew my damaged axe wasn't helping matters. After the hunt, I also finally passed the threshold of 1,000 points, and I could now purchase a skill from the pylon. This would be the first skill I got not from a class upgrade, and I was nervous to see how many I could hold. There had to be some way to tell how full my spirit was, right? Austin and I finished our hunt without any injuries this time and made it back to camp with only light exhaustion. It may have been because we didn't fight anything above level 9. But who's to say? I washed myself in the river, got a quick heal from Abigail, and after stuffing down breakfast was off to the trench. The pylon upgrade kind of threw off our predictions of what direction the wave would come from, but we were still confident it would come from the south this time, so that's where we focused our energy. Penetrating Strike worked wonders while digging and made getting through the hard dirt a breeze. I worked much faster than without the skill and only had problems when I reached large rocks in the way. A discreet use of Heavy Blow was all it took to make those go away. Usually, it would take time to dig the rock out before hauling it out of the trench, but amazingly I never ran into any rocks today, just a bunch of little ones. I focused more on my skills today than on the physical side of the exercise and tried to maximize my usage of my new skill. I wanted to learn it as quickly as possible and get familiarized with it before the wave tomorrow. Austin had the Piercing Strike skill, and we compared the difference between the two, and it was hard to tell. They both did the same thing, and the dirt we used to test it on probably wasn't the best choice. Work flew by as my mind was elsewhere, and soon it was over and we had time to do whatever we wanted. I spent the whole time thinking about which new skill that I wanted, and there were just so many options. There were generic skills like meditation that I could grab, or the more utility option of cleanse, so I could help keep the camp clean along with the food. There were resistance skills that looked like they would come in handy, like poison resistance and fire resistance. Being at the common rarity, they probably wouldn't do much, but I would never know unless I got one. I could focus on a weapon or armor proficiency and pick one of those, but I wasn't sure I was ready to commit to a weapon yet. I liked my axe and shield, but it's been the only thing that I used. I wanted to try out different things before I committed to buying a skill for them. I had no idea if you could remove a skill after getting it, and it would be a waste of points if I didn't like it, but I could always go get more. At the rate we were growing, Austin and I averaged 40 points a kill now, and we killed over 8 boars a day. I wished it would be more, but there was only so much time between sunrise and breakfast, and 8 was already pushing it. Before we stopped using the spikes, it was more like 4 or 5 a day. Eventually, we would need to stop hiding it and dedicate more time to it, but so soon after Derek's death, I didn't wish to make anyone worry. They knew how difficult fighting could be, and I couldn't sugarcoat it and tell them it was easy. There was the brief thought of getting a magical skill like Mana Bolt or Ice Bolt so that I would have a ranged option that didn't rely on carrying around javelins, but that was mostly because it would be cool. I mean, who doesn't want to shoot magic from their hands? It wouldn't be as powerful as the mages with their better stats and wands to help them, but I could still do it. Those thoughts didn't last long, and I pushed them away to be more practical. Right now, my biggest weakness during the waves was a skill for multiple enemies. Now that I had 2 powerful skills for single target damage while hunting, I needed to focus on what would help during the waves. After focusing on that, it made the list considerably shorter. I eventually narrowed down between 2 that I couldn't decide between: Whirlwind and Sweeping Strike. They both did essentially the same thing and projected a strike in a radius around my body. Sweeping Strike, common, projects a blade made of mana out from your weapon that deals reduced damage to everything hit. Whirlwind, common, after using a spinning strike, projects an attack made of mana outwards that deals damage depending on the distance from the center. They both functioned as attacks that hit multiple enemies and functioned much the same way. Sweeping Strike would project my swing in a semicircle around me, while Whirlwind was the full 360 degrees. Whirlwind didn't have anything about dealing decreased damage, so it was most likely the more powerful of the 2. But it came with the downside of being harder to control. It was a spinning attack and dealt damage in the full circle even though allies could be behind me. Plus, I wasn't excited about turning my back to the enemy and breaking line of sight. Sweeping Strike looked like it would be easier to control and would only follow my swing, but it dealt less damage. I was on the fence about which to pick, so I thought to ask for advice. Abigail was always a good person to go to because she thought everything out to the last detail and would often catch something I had missed. I went to her before dinner and told her my thoughts on the matter. She took a while to think it through before saying, "It's your skill and you can pick either of them you want, but you have to think about how often you fight alone. How many times will you have to be conscious of when you use Whirlwind instead of Sweeping Strike, and is that as much of a detriment to choose the weaker one?" When she put it like that, it was an easy decision. Whirlwind would be too situational and Sweeping Strike would be more useful. Without letting myself deliberate any further, I walked to the pylon to buy the skill. It worked exactly like getting a class skill, and after taking my points, the skill was pushed into my spirit. It felt a little different than class skills and felt like it was placed in a different part of my spirit, but I didn't have the best knowledge of such things, so I chalked it up to happenstance. There was nothing I could do to find out. There wasn't any pain, and it certainly didn't feel like a strain on my spirit, but I didn't really know what a spirit was or how to feel mine. Just another thing on a long list of shit I didn't know. I was a bit sad to give up on the magical skills and the dream of slinging magic around, but I promised myself the next skill I bought would be magical. It most likely wouldn't be the most practical with my lacking mana, but I needed some joy, and having magic would do that. I saw Alice and Rachel playing with magic every day, and I wanted some too, damn it. I spent the rest of the day practicing my new skills and sparring with Austin. He went full offensive with his skill set and got yet another attacking skill. His new skill was Flurry. It increased his speed, and he delivered a quick set of spear thrusts which were downright impossible to block. The only thing I could do was cover as much of my body as I could with my shield and hope my fortitude was enough for the rest. He couldn't use the new skill long, and it took a lot of effort to use. Not only was it mana intensive, but it also tired him out, the same with my upgraded skill heavy blow. It took some kind of stamina energy to use that drained you and left you extremely tired if you used all of it. We theorized it had something to do with endurance, but we couldn't be sure with our lack of knowledge. I made the joke that I wouldn't be his tank forever and he would eventually have to invest in some defensive skills, but he just waved me off, saying offense was the best defense. I didn't know how true that was, but I left him to do what he wanted. I knew how I would feel about being told what to do and wasn't going to do that to another. He was close to buying a skill with points, and he voiced his ideas to me about which ones he was thinking about. He was in the same boat as I was and had high single target damage but was lacking in the AoE department. Since he was putting off the defensive skills, I ignored those and focused on what would be good for him to get. Are you certain about the spear? Do you think you're ever going to change weapons? I asked, trying to get some more information to go on. Yeah, I quite like the spear. I don't think that I'm going to change, he said while twirling said spear in his hand. What about other polearms like halberds or glaives? They're similar. I was trying to see if it was the spear he liked or the range of a polearm. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels right. The spear, I mean. It feels comfortable to use, and I've used different weapons for sparring, just like you have, but none of them feel the same, he said back. There were times where we traded weapons with others to try and get a feel for something else, but none of that helped me. I found I was absolutely terrible with a sword and didn't like the spear either. The only other weapon I liked was Mark's two-handed battle axe, and he wasn't keen on trading. I didn't wish to get rid of my shield, but it was an option when I finally had to buy new gear, and the time to do so was getting near. There were various area skills for a spear, and the one that popped out to me was Spear Sweep, which was similar to my skill Sweeping Strike. It was more specialized for the spear, but the only difference was most of the attack area was the shaft of the spear, not the blade, so it would have to be used effectively. Flurry could be used to attack multiple enemies, but that was more like quick stabs rather than a wide area of attack skill. Since there wasn't anything too good in that department and he was set on the spear, I suggested the spear proficiency skill. It wouldn't be an active skill he was looking for, but it was a passive one that helped with all usage of the spear. Since it was hyper-specialized to a single weapon, it should have good bonuses as well. He took my advice but didn't commit to anything. He still needed a few more points to buy one and talked me into a quick hunt before tomorrow's wave. Usually, we rested before the wave, but a few boars where I let him get the killing blow wouldn't take long. Plus, he would have another skill to use during the wave. People were still not convinced about the difficulty drop of the waves and were gearing up for a tough fight tomorrow. I wasn't one to speculate when we would all find out together. It would either be hard or it wouldn't. I would make sure we survived all the same. Chapter 24, Day 16. Foxes. It just had to be foxes. The wave this morning happened the same as all the rest had, and I found myself being serenaded in the cacophony of ungodly yips. I had never seen a fox before in real life, but if these were anything to go off of, they were annoying as hell. As the group traveled toward our walls, all you could hear were the yips and yaps of over 100 of the annoying creatures. I was already planning to kill them, but I was going to try ever so harder now. It was like it was a mental attack before they reached us. There were no other explanations that explained why they had to be so loud. It was nearly impossible to get the high-pitched screeches out of my head before the leading animals reached me. The next 30 minutes were mostly a blur of gore, viscera, and fluids better left undescribed. The foxes were not very durable, but where they lacked in fortitude they made up for in sharp teeth that easily penetrated skin. The boss was the most difficult part. It was past the level 10 threshold and was an absolute nightmare to take down. Everyone outside of the wall was, once again, told to retreat, so we didn't get to fight it up close. There were a few more volunteers this time out in front of the wall, which was a nice bonus. Jonathan and my dad joined me and a few more as well. It was nice to see people putting in the effort to get stronger. While we were retreating through the gate, the only living beasts left of the wave were a few foxes who lagged behind the rest, along with the boss. The boss wasn't massive, nor did it have a coat of armor surrounding it that made it so difficult. It was only 50% bigger than the normal foxes of the wave, and those were only the size of the average dog. It was the speed that the boss had that made it so difficult. It dodged all of the arrows that were shot at it and laughed at the slow magic bolts aimed at it. It was a mess of changing directions, weaving around other foxes for cover, and the uncanny ability to know when magic was heading toward it. I saw a fire bolt that Rachel launched that I was sure would hit the thing while it was facing the other way trying to dodge an arrow. Not only did the boss dodge the arrow, it never even turned around to see the fire bolt before it ducked out of the way. It had a sixth sense or something and was a master of evasion. As the boss neared, we were given the order to retreat. When the boss saw us filing through the gate, it charged at full speed, trying to get through. Half of us tried to sprint faster through the gate so we could close it, the other half turned to brace for the boss charge, with a couple who stood there not knowing what to do. I was a part of the group that turned around to face the charge, but before the boss could reach us, a wall of ice sprang from the ground, blocking us from the boss. The boss charge was halted by the magic barrier that it suddenly found itself facing, and it rammed face first into it. The ice making up the wall cracked but held from the force of the charge. Before I could think any further on the matter, we were shouted at to get behind the walls. After we made it through and closed the gate, the wall of ice disappeared. It held long enough for all of us to make it inside of the walls. "Good job, Alice," I heard my grandfather say before I looked up onto the guard tower to see Alice slumped down in exhaustion. It must have taken a decent amount of mana to make a wall of ice that size, and she was feeling the aftereffects now. I didn't even know what skill it was, and now that we were all inside of the wall, and our melee group's jobs were done, I sought out Jack to ask him about Alice's new skill. He informed me that for Alice's level 6 skill, she got Ice Wall, and that was what was just displayed. I noted it down for later and added it to my list of potential skills to buy or get. It was a perfect skill for a tactical retreat. You could erect a barrier behind you while you moved to a better spot. Or you could put it off to the side to shrink the front line of a battle. It could also be used to give you a slight reprieve from battle if placed between you and the wave. It could also be used how Alice did just now and give us a few extra moments to shut the gate. I didn't know if I'd use my last class skill for it, but it sure wouldn't be a bad one to use points for. For the 6th wave of the tutorial, I got a whopping 765 points. It was a far cry away from the 15 that I earned on the first day. Hell, it was 3/4 THS of the way to another skill. I knew that I would have to give half of them up for whatever we decided to purchase as a group, but it was still a considerable amount. This was the first wave that I outleveled all of the regular monsters in a wave, and it felt good. I was still lower than the boss of a wave, but all except that were level 6 and 7. I established my lead. Now all I had to do was hold it. My stats were a lot higher than where they started, and it showed the difference in the wounds that I took. As an example, Mark, a level 5 warrior, had deep bite marks from the foxes that bled profusely until a healer applied a skill to the wound, while when I got bit, the teeth penetrated a few inches and the wound dribbled blood instead of gushing. The wound most likely would have closed by itself given time, but there was no point with healers on standby to fix just that. My strength was the biggest difference. I was most familiar with fighting boars all day and not the different monsters of the wave, and boars were inherently defensive in how they spent levels, or however animals level. The foxes weren't as tanky as the boars, and my axe without any skills did considerable damage to them. Just the common skill of penetrating strike was enough to bisect them, and that said nothing of my new uncommon skill. Speaking of, it worked like a charm. It had a penchant for turning what used to be inside a creature, outside, in a violent manner. I used it on one unlucky fox, and it disappeared in a mist of pinkish red that made it look like a bomb went off. I was just glad I had my mouth closed. There were some things I was better off not knowing what they tasted like. I didn't feel like covering myself in gore any more than I had to, so I kept the use of that skill to a minimum. A small part of me enjoyed obliterating the monster like that, but I couldn't indulge that part of me now. People would start to think I was a psychopath. I had saved my free point from reaching level 8 for the wave to see if there was anything I needed to improve. The foxes, being as fast as they were, proved hard to hit. There were enough of them so that it wasn't that big of an issue, but if I had to pinpoint one, it was difficult. How it was now was if I missed one, I would hit a different one. I knew it was a smidge cocky to go into a fight with a stat point unspent, but it was only one. There's only so much one stat point would do. I still put it into agility though midway through the fight to help matters. My new skill was a blessing during the wave and was most of the reason that I did so well. It was the perfect counter to the fast and weak furballs, and when the blue blade made of mana hit them, it crippled limbs and broke bones. Sweeping Slash took some getting used to, but after sparring with Austin yesterday, I had a decent handle on it. The mana manipulation practice every day helped, and it made adjusting to the new skill intuitive instead of grasping in the dark. The skill had a variable amount of mana to activate, and the initial amount changed the distance the blade extended out. I could pump the skill with as much mana as I could for a blade that extended a yard out from the end of my axe, or I could adjust it for a smaller blade. The blade followed where I swung my axe and extended the range of my swings. The only thing wrong with the skill was that the mana blade wasn't the strongest. When I used it while hunting this morning before the wave, the blade broke against the boar's skin, and all it did was leave superficial marks on the hide. The hardest part of the skill was getting the blade to go away. It wasn't as easy as an on-off switch, and I had to be careful how I swung my axe in the beginning until I got the hang of it. The knowledge the skill gave me was to cut off the projected blade from my weapon and the mana blade would dissipate, but I thought that was wasteful. There wasn't anything I could do differently, but it felt wrong to leave all that mana to just dissipate. I tried to launch it so it would do some extra damage from range, but it didn't work. It was disappointing, but I had to settle for what I knew. Both of my new skills were extremely helpful, and I was very glad in my choices. During the cleanup, I looked over my status. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, H-Human. Class Warrior, Level 8. Profession, None. Faction, Zelensky Family. Temporary. Strength, 31. Agility, 14. Perception, 10. Fortitude, 19. Endurance, 22. Vitality, 21. Intelligence, 9. Wisdom, 12. Acumen, 8. Free points, 0. Laws, none. Skills, Heavy Blow, Uncommon. Fortified Body, Common. Throwing Weapon Proficiency, Beginner. Identify, Common. Penetrating Strike, Common. Sweeping Slash, Common. Coins, 0. Points, 409. It was good progress, and the skills weren't as derelict as before. What I really wanted to remedy on the sheet was the blank profession. Scott ended up gaining the carpenter profession yesterday and told all of us about it. He said that it had the same stat increase per level as classes did, and carpenter gave +2 strength, +2 agility, +1 wisdom, +1 acumen per level. It was a good answer to a lopsided class. I wondered what would happen if you evolved into a strength-heavy class. Would you have to spend every free point trying to keep your other stats from lagging too far behind? There had to be other ways to get stat points other than through levels and training. Training was already slowing down, and I couldn't imagine how slow it would be to increase a stat through training when you had over 100 strength. There were obviously some diminishing returns, and my training proved that. I kept at it though because every bit helped, and leaving a potential increase on the table was the paramount of idiocy. It made sense that training would do less and less because otherwise someone could just lift weights for years on end and get hundreds of stat points in strength. I really wanted to dissect the information tab in the store because there had to be answers to my questions, and I wanted to find them. After Scott got his profession, the others followed later that day using his guidance. It showed how much faster it was to get a profession by having someone teach you, rather than being self-taught. The profession was a much-needed life improvement, and it went a long way for people's moods. The 3 newly minted carpenters got straight to work and replaced our derelict tents with some proper lodges. There wasn't enough time to build everyone their own personal lodge, so I still had to share, but it was infinitely better than the tent. They made actual furniture and accessories. We now ate at a table instead of doing the lap table we were forced to. Also, we now had chairs replacing the stumps we were using. There were other quality-of-life improvements that all added up to a monumental change. The 3 of them were working non-stop all day to crank out as much new stuff as they could. Their skills were a wonder to watch, and it went to show how magical our new world was. They didn't get to pick like we did with our classes, so all of them started with the same skill, but they had the techniques they could use from the book we had purchased. Scott was especially proficient with his new profession since he had previous experience in woodworking and building various things. Seeing how much easier a profession made things, we unanimously decided that's what we would spend our points on until we had all the basic professions to make things easier. We gained about 7,000 points to use for spending on the group and could now afford another profession book. Leatherworker was the profession that won, after discussion, and we soon had a total of 2 books in our possession. Our gear was in desperate need of repair, and we also needed something to do with all of the animal skins that got delivered to us every 3 days. Only 2 people wanted to become leatherworkers, and I would be first in line for commissioning their skills. I believed I would look dashing in a new fox fur pauldron. They deserved to be made into armor, and I would get no small amount of glee from wearing one because of how annoying they were. My pettiness was on a new level. Chapter 25, To Wait or Not to Wait. I was bummed that I didn't level after the wave, but it made sense. I leveled not too long ago, and asking for another so soon was greedy. I was still keeping a pace of more than a level a wave, so it wasn't like I was falling behind. In 6 waves, I leveled 8 times. 7 if you exclude level 1, since that was given to me. Worse than the scout that visited, but still better than most of my family. The lowest level among us was Diana at level 5. She hadn't been doing much, and none of us felt right about asking her to. Besides her, the next lowest level was 6, with several people there. Not everyone participated that much during the waves, and they certainly didn't go out of their way to hunt. That was fine with me. Not everyone excelled in one area. They could just focus on their professions once they got one. We had done it enough times that the cleanup was a breeze, and the rest of the day melted by. Since Austin and I hunted in the morning and fought in the wave, we decided to give our bodies time to rest before we began again tomorrow. We both had bite marks in various places and scratch marks here and there that still felt tender after getting healed. I was in no mind to push it and didn't wish to reopen old wounds, so it was a light workout and magic practice for the rest of the day. I kept putting off training my perception because it never seemed to do anything, but I went out of my way to dedicate an hour or 2 to it. I couldn't keep ignoring it forever, even though I wanted to. It paid off because the following morning's training notification finally had an increase in perception. The stubborn stat finally decided to go up after 2 weeks. It only increased by 1, but it was still something to celebrate. Now I had officially trained all of my stats by at least 1. Everyone had probably done that as well, but it was a nice feeling while it lasted. Austin and I started our hunt the same as we usually would and noticed that we were slaughtering these boars now instead of the fights they used to be. My upgraded skill along with both of our new ones made the fights a lot easier than they had been. Now we had to decide if going for level 10s was worth it. Fighting a level 10 was considerably harder, but well worth it in satisfaction. Not only did it feel better to fight something that was an actual challenge, it was more rewarding as well. It was hard to explain, but the level 10s gave us chunks of experience compared to below that level. It would still take a decent number of them to level off of, but considerably less than fighting level 8s. We both agreed to risk it and started searching for level 10s to take down. We still killed all of the lower level ones we saw, but it wasn't what we focused on anymore. When we actually encountered the evolved boars, we got more serious and fought defensively, slowly wearing the creature down. It was similar to the last time we fought the earthhide boar, but it went a lot smoother. Instead of feeling like we were wielding feathers instead of weapons, it felt more like the fight it should have been. Penetrating strike easily chipped through their hide, and Austin's quick stabs were enough to overwhelm the poor thing. After I shaved its armor off, Austin poked enough holes in the thing so it bled out or until he hit something vital. The fights were a slog and took a while to get through, but they weren't the life-threatening experience they were a few days ago. It was marveling to see how fast something could change like that. One day we almost died to that level of difficulty, and a few days later we could face it confidently. It went to show if you weren't advancing, you were getting left behind. We didn't level that day either, but managed it on the next. Day 18 was a good day in that I reached level 9 and we got a new leatherworker. Sam and Ashley, the mother-daughter duo, were the 2 who wanted the profession, and it took them 2 days to unlock it. Sam was used to fixing up clothes and could do alterations to all kinds of apparel. Ashley was the same, but she was big into getting clothes from thrift stores and altering them to whatever she wanted. She sold some of them, but most were for her personal use. Taylor would have been a better fit for their skills, but that wasn't what we had available to us. We were drowning in leather, not cloth, and it wasn't clothes we needed, it was armor. My armor was shot. There was no way it would last much longer, and I desperately wanted to avoid buying a new set. I didn't know why I felt it was a waste of points, but I did, and I not so politely bugged the two girls about it. Finally, they got so sick of me asking that I was the first person whose armor they made. It made it so that I would get their most inexperienced work, but that didn't matter to me. Better it go to me with the fortitude to compensate than someone else who had fewer stats. I could always get them to make another set if it wasn't up to snuff. The armor would take a few days to complete, and it wouldn't be as comfortable as what the system manifested, but that was to be expected. They didn't finish it in time for the 7th wave, and I had to make it through without it. It was a wave of snakes this time, and they weren't that hard to take down. Their speed was their downfall and allowed us to greatly diminish their number before they came close. Luckily, they weren't venomous, and the few who got bit only needed a quick heal to fix the wound. It was the unlucky two who let them wrap around their legs who would be feeling it for a few days. The snakes were strong enough to break bones when they coiled around it a few times. I never let them get that far, so I didn't have first-hand experience with them. They got pulled back in time to where a broken leg was the extent of the damage. Granddad tried to use it as an excuse to get us to retreat, but he gave up when someone floated the idea that the snakes might be able to climb the wall. It never got that far, and their numbers were already plenty thinned out from our ranged attacks, so it wasn't that difficult to cull the rest. They were less difficult to fight than the evolved boars Austin and I were used to. My axe was more of a hammer now after beating it against the sturdy boars for a few days, but it still did the job. It crushed them more than sliced them, but they ended up dead all the same. After the wave, we could afford to get 2 more professions, and it created a dilemma for me. I needed to start thinking about which profession I wanted to get and how long it would take me to achieve. The profession that I wanted the most was enchanter. I was studying to be an engineer before I started moonlighting as a warrior, and watching the wall get enchanted was calling to me the same way engineering did. The reason I first got into engineering was because of the fascination I had with finding out how things worked and how they were made. All the pieces adding up to get the desired effect was something that would never get dull. I still remembered in vivid detail as the runes were drawn and the feeling that it gave me. It was something that I wanted to learn how it worked, and no other profession called to me like that did. The only problem was that the information book for enchanting was expensive. It was double what the rest were, and on our priority list for professions it was at the bottom. Alchemist was debated about getting but was vetoed for the same reason as enchanter, too expensive. We could get 2 other professions for the cost of one. Plus, we doubted that anything that a new alchemist could make would be as good as something bought from the store. Blacksmith was next on the impromptu list we had made, followed by the more generic craftsman. Those were in no way set in stone, just what we thought was needed for the camp. Originally, farmer and gardener were discarded because we thought there was no way there was enough time to grow anything, but watching what the carpenter job could do, it might have to rejoin consideration. I wouldn't consider it worth it, but then again I wasn't complaining about the protein-heavy diet. I could go for some carbs like bread or potatoes as much as the next guy, but that wasn't what was important. Survival came first, and having a field of crops did nothing if you were too dead to eat them. Carpenter was chosen over builder because we had a lot of wood to work with and lacked other materials, which made it the better choice. The same reasoning made tailor unfavorable. There were some that we didn't know what exactly they would do, like cook or explorer. We could cook just fine now, and we didn't know what getting the profession would do differently. Spending 5,000 points to find out wasn't on our list of things to do. Some were thrown out automatically for being non-essential, like painter, merchant, and jeweler. We didn't have very many precious gems lying around to make that feasible. There were a bunch that dealt in territory management that were ignored as well, like whatever the hell essential was. In my eyes, the next one up should be blacksmith so that we could repair our gear and maybe make more. We would have to buy the metal from the shop, but that was way cheaper than buying a new weapon outright. As there always was when we had to decide on something, opinions were varied. The idea was floated out there that now that we had made contact with another pylon merchant wasn't as useless as it used to be. We could trade others for things that we didn't have. Maybe trade for stone or metal from a pylon that had those close by, or better plants from a pylon in the more forested region. If we could get stone from another group, stonemason was back on the table. Our pylon was along the edge of the forest, and the nearest stone we could quarry was in the mountainous region to the north. We actively ignored that region and tried our best not to go there. The one time a scout was sent north, it encountered monsters that instead of giving a level when identified, it gave back question marks. Later, when we sent Kyle, with his longer-ranged and more powerful identify skill, he said that the creature was level 25. Ever since then, we quenched our hopes of getting stone to use for building. The monster in question showed no signs of venturing south and seemed to be content to stay where it was near the mountain. It was a lot colder the closer to the mountain you got, and we figured it didn't wish to leave the environment. We still kept a lookout pointed that way, but after 2 weeks of nothing happening, we figured it wouldn't come south. Monsters from the forest came closer to the camp all the time and had to be put down. But the northern beasts didn't have that inclination. It was decided that blacksmith and craftsman were the 2 professions that we would buy with the points from the wave. Now that we had all of the essential jobs, we could afford to spend a little more and get one of the expensive professions next, like alchemist. 10,000 points and 2 books later, I had a decision that I needed to make. Scott had leveled carpenter a few times by now, and he was increasing his stats faster than I could train, and I had to decide if waiting for enchanter was worth it. It wasn't on the list of priorities, and it would at least be a few waves before it was considered, which was at least a week and a half to 2. I could learn blacksmithing and get a few levels under my belt by the time that I would be holding out on enchanter. And if I got stronger from profession levels, I could leverage it to fight tougher monsters to then level faster. It wasn't like that I was averse to being a blacksmith. My schooling had involved a lot of material analysis and manufacturing processes, forging included. I wouldn't be starting with zero knowledge of how to do it and could jump into working a lot faster than Sam had with leatherworking. I didn't know if holding out would be worth it in the long run. The faster I gained strength, the higher my ceiling would be by the time the tutorial ended. While I was in my own head musing, the 2 books were purchased and the rest of the family were deciding on who would learn them. I came back to the conversation at the end. All right, we have 2 people who want to be craftsmen and only 1 blacksmith. Is there anyone else who wants to be a blacksmith? I don't know if 1 is going to be enough for everything that we need done. Granddad was trying to gauge interest in the new professions. He was met by silence. It seemed no one besides my cousin Vincent wanted to be a blacksmith. Fuck it, I guess I'll do it. Maybe I could push it toward being a runesmith or something through the evolutions. Chapter 26, Profession Acquired. Fuck. God damn it. Stupid son of a bitch. I couldn't hold it in anymore. This was the most frustrating thing I had ever done. I thought about reading through the book again, but it wouldn't do any good. I had already been through it multiple times by now, and reading it again wouldn't help. I had been trying to get the profession for 2 days, and it seemed like it was an exercise in futility. The only thing motivating me by this point was trying to beat Vinny. Vinny, or Vincent, was having the same amount of success as me, which was none at all. Deep breaths, Chris. Don't let the stupid metal beat you. I tried to calm down and not get so worked up, but it was difficult. I didn't think that it would take this long, and it was starting to get on my nerves. Being so close to evolving my class didn't help matters. I reached level 9 on day 18, and it's been 3 days since then. We had the wave on the 19th in Austin, and I had been hunting more enthusiastically, trying to cross the threshold. Nothing we did worked, and it felt like we were still some distance away. Level 10 was a step up from reaching all the others, and the amount of experience to reach it was enormous. One thing that I did have going for me was that I was able to get a new skill after hunting yesterday, and it was super cool. Cool. Pun totally intended. I promised myself a magic skill the next time I could afford one, and I stuck to it. I thought about getting Mana Bolt or Ice Bolt, but after seeing the effectiveness of Ice Wall, that's what I went with. It was a great skill and had a multitude of uses in battle. I hadn't gotten to use it that much since I had gotten it because I focused more on getting a profession. What good that did me. I was still too angry to think straight, so I decided to take a walk to clear my head and get out of the heat that the room was bathed in. Since we had to do blacksmithing work to get the class, we set up a makeshift hut for Vinny and me to work in. It wasn't the best setup, but it got the job done. The ventilation wasn't very good, and it felt suffocating to be in the room for the amount of time I had been in it. The hut had a chimney, and it did a decent job of exhausting all of the smoke from the fire, but we were still inhaling some of it. I was drenched in sweat and had dirt and grime covering my face and arms. As I exited the tent, the sharp drop in temperature gave me goosebumps. It felt like it was getting colder as the days passed on. I ran into Austin not far from the forge, and it looked like he was walking toward it. Everything okay? I heard shouting and someone slamming things. He said. Yeah, everything is fine, just frustrated is all. I didn't think that it would take this long. I said back dejectedly. Stop beating yourself up. It took Scott a day and a half and it took Sam just over 2. You aren't taking any longer than they did. He replied. I knew it was wrong to think I was better than them, but I didn't think that it would take me this long to get the profession. I knew what I was doing and thought that I was doing everything right. The profession just refused to come. It had taken a while to get used to actually doing the work inside the forge and attempting to make something from a lump of metal, and that's how the first day went. I had all this knowledge, but it was all theoretical, none of it was practical. I knew why certain tasks were done and what it did to the metal, but I'd never done it before. Certainly never using the ancient way of doing it. We had machines nowadays that did most of the process for us. We had hydraulic presses that were used instead of the inconsistent hammering of a human. We had specifically designed molds to get just the right shape, not freehanding it and hoping for the best. A day of forging was not enough to be called proficient, and it showed in the things that I had made. I thought I would start off by making a knife. Nice and easy, right? Wrong. It took so much longer than I thought it would. Every hammer strike did something that I didn't want and had to spend a while fixing. Instead of drawing out the metal to get the right length, it flattened out into a sheet. When I turned it on its side to decrease the width, it would roll over into a tube. I swear it was like the metal had a mind of its own, and it did the opposite of whatever I wanted it to do. After my beginning failures, I took the time to read through the book with my confidence thoroughly broken. I now knew that I didn't have as much knowledge about what I was doing as I thought I did. I assumed that it was common sense and it would only take me a few tries to get the hang of it. That couldn't be further from the truth. Every hammer strike had to be precise not only in location but strength and angle as well. Even the surface the part was resting on had an effect. It was a steep learning curve that I was just starting to see the bottom of. My most recent project, another knife, turned out so bad that I threw it across the room. I scrapped my first attempt less than 10 minutes into the work and would forever deny I ever attempted it. But this attempt was different. I had spent a lot of time drawing the metal out and then hammering its shape. I felt confident this would be the one to get me the profession. The mana circulation technique was difficult at first, but I got the hang of it eventually and maintained it for the duration of the crafting process. The book detailed that you had to cycle your mana through the part in a specific way, and in doing so, it would help you while crafting. In the beginning, it was a huge detriment while forging because I had to split my focus on too many things. I had to keep the fire at the right temperature, watch the metal to make sure it never got too hot or too cold, and adjust the angle and strength of every strike, all the while maintaining a convoluted mana technique. At first, it was like rubbing your belly while patting your head. The actions conflicted with each other, and soon everything came falling down like Jenga blocks. If I focused too much on the mana technique, I would overheat the metal. If I focused more on the metal, I would forget the mana technique. It was a juggling act which I was currently failing. My latest attempt was the best one yet, and I thought that I would have succeeded too. But the world wished to curse me. The knife looked fine while I was working on it, but as soon as I finished and saw it in a better light, I noticed how bad it was. Nothing was parallel, the knife had a curve to it that wasn't intended, and saying it was of uniform thickness would be a stretch. It had taken hours and I failed again. I had a newfound respect for Scott and Sam because this was getting the better of me. Looking over to Austin, I said, I need to hit something. I wanted to vent my frustration, and what better way than by beating something up? We can spar if you want. It's a little late, but I'm up for it. Austin said back while rolling his shoulders as if to test his body. As thrilling as it is to fight you, I'd rather beat my head against a wall, I said back. Fighting Austin would just add to my frustrations, not vent them. He was faster than me since he invested more in agility and had a longer weapon. Fighting him was not the experience I had in mind. It was like fighting a bee who was quicker than you and stung you throughout the whole process. All it would take to end the fight was to catch it, but it always managed to slip away. If Austin wasn't my friend, I think I would start to hate him. I'm gonna go find something to kill. I'll be back before sundown, I said before walking away. I wished to be alone, and Austin must have sensed that and let me go. I was glad that he didn't pester me about it, unlike what my sister would have done. Finding a target wasn't that difficult, and all my frustrations seemed to vanish. All the pent-up anger left my body and was projected on the poor forest denizens. It most likely wasn't a healthy way to deal with anger, but I didn't think there was a healthy way anymore. As my head cleared and I stopped focusing on everything that I did wrong, I tried to think about how to go about it a different way. If I was focusing on too many things at once, I would try to simplify what I was doing. Instead of trying to maintain the mana circulation technique while I was forging like it was two separate processes, I would combine them. The technique circulated mana through the part during the crafting phase to do various things to aid while crafting. For the carpenters, it let them sense the knots in the wood along with a better feel for the grain so they could carve better, while also improving the wood during the process. For the leatherworkers, it let them see the blemishes in the hide and get a better sense of where to cut and size things while slightly improving the hide. For blacksmiths, it helped them see the irregularities in the metal while also helping them sense the stresses added while forging. It also helped improve the metal during the process, but I was starting to think that was what every profession did. You had to cycle mana throughout the part while also interpreting what it felt like. All with the added difficulty of compensating for the mana loss that dissipated off of the metal during the process. I could send mana out of my body and into the part from a distance, but that added a layer of difficulty to the whole process. It was a lot easier to maintain if you were touching the thing you were trying to inject mana into. Both of my hands were either busy wielding the hammer or holding the tongs, so I thought that learning how to maintain the technique at a distance was necessary and was part of the learning process. But what if I combined those actions? I could send my mana into the part along with the hammer strikes while bringing it back into my body through the tongs. Nothing specifically said that I had to cycle it through only the part. It would be harder to bring it through the tongs, but altogether easier than keeping the processes separate. I had no need to continue my carnage in the forest, so I ran back to the forge to try my new idea. I even forgot to rinse the blood off of me before I made it back to camp. I quickly entered the forge and picked out a new piece of metal to use for the project, throwing it into the fire to heat it up. I ignored Vinny's odd stares and focused on the crafting process. It took me some time to get used to sending my mana along the hammer and injecting it into the part. The timing was everything, and if I was a little off it wouldn't work. I had been hammering away for 2 days now, so I quickly got used to the new process. Pulling it back through the tongs was another thing I had to get used to, but it wasn't much harder. As soon as I got the hang of it, I scrapped the process and started anew. I wanted everything to be perfect, and I couldn't start on the metal I used to practice on. This was going to be the one. I could feel it. I put the new piece of metal into the fire and started making yet another knife. Pulling the bright orange metal out of the fire, I put it onto the anvil we had to buy and got to work. Mana flowed along my arm into my hammer before swinging it down onto the metal, injecting it with mana. I cycled it throughout the structure and pulled it back along the tongs. Sent mana up through my arm into the hammer, down into the metal, back through the tongs. It was working. The only thing that I could hear were the clangs of metal. It was late into the night and I was most likely ruining people's sleep, but I didn't care. This was it. If this didn't work, I was going to scream. Everything felt perfect. The technique was working fine with my new process. My hammering was in rhythm, and the metal was perfect. Clang, 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 flip, clang, clang, clang. I put the finishing touches onto the knife and I was ready to complete the process. We didn't have any oil to use, so we had to settle for water. I put the blade back into the forge until it was glowing hot, then submerged it in the water. It took some time to cool down, and the last thing I had to do was grind it down to a sharp edge. We had bought the grindstone previously, and it was only a few steps away. After grinding it down, it was ready for a handle. Scott had been nice enough to make us some handles already, and they were ready to use. I had practiced this part before and went through the process with experienced hands. The pommel came next, and I hammered it into place. I had to do some spot work on the grindstone before capping it off with a polish, and I was done. It looked like a knife, was shaped like a knife, and was as sharp as a knife, but it was no masterwork. I had a silly smile on my face anyway. This was the best one I had made, and the system must have agreed. Congratulations! You have acquired the blacksmith profession. Chapter 27, Level 10. I was so excited that I had finally got the profession that I nearly started shouting in joy. It then dawned on me how late it was and thought better of it. I had already been making enough noise with my hammer, no need to add to it by shouting. The exhaustion from the day came and hit me in full force, and I internalized what time it was. It was the dead of night, with the only light being the twinkling of the stars above. No moon to light the way. I didn't know where we were exactly, but the no moon thing still threw me for a loop every time I looked into the sky. The night sky just looked so different than what I was used to. All of the constellations were different, and I couldn't find Orion in the sky. It was the end of winter when we were sucked into this tutorial, and Orion should still be in the sky to signify winter was still here. I knew of other constellations, but none I could pick out as easily. There was obviously the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, but they were absent as well. Even the North Star was missing from its rightful place in the night sky. Orion was always my favorite because if I could see it, it meant winter was coming. It was usually only visible halfway through fall where I lived, and there would be a chill in the air as it began its stint across the horizon. Winter had always been my favorite season, and I absolutely loved the snow. It was a beautiful time with the chilly weather, foggy breath, and the crispness in the air. It was 1,000 times better than the humid, suffocating heat of summer or the pollen-infested winds and rains of spring. Fall, or autumn if your fancy, was a close second. Watching the leaves change and the beginning of sweatshirt weather was second fiddle to the snows of winter, but it would always remain second. At least to me. I was in dire need of sleep, so I left my ruminations about the sky there and made my way toward my bed. Sleep claimed me quickly, and I was off to dreamland. Austin had to wake me up the next morning, or else I would have slept in. I must have been more tired than I thought, and it took him a few minutes to wake me from my slumber. I was still wiping the sleep from my eyes as we walked through the gate out of camp. "What time did you go to bed last night? You were sleeping like the dead," Austin asked. "I don't know. I didn't check before I went to bed. But it was late," I answered. "I know it was late. I heard your hammer until midnight keeping me up." "Don't worry, you'll get it soon enough," he said while patting me on the shoulder as if to console me. "I don't know what you're talking about. I got it last night," I said smugly. Austin took a moment to process what I said before laughing. He shook his head and smiled. "Of course you did. Well, how is it? What did you get?" I hadn't actually looked at it yet. He had pulled me out of bed so early my mind was still waking up. Pulling up my notification screen, I dismissed the usual training one after checking it over and pulled up the one he was talking about. "Congratulations. You have unlocked the blacksmith profession. Novice blacksmith. Blacksmiths work with metal and their hands to create works of art. Whether that art takes the form of structures, weapons, armor, or anything else, it is up to the creator. See where your creativity takes you and create works of wonder." Common evolutions: armor smith, weaponsmith, apprentice blacksmith, artificer. +2 strength, +1 agility, +1 fortitude, +2 endurance. You have acquired a new skill. Sense metal, common. Scan an object with your mana to reveal the inner workings of the metal. Can see faults and stresses hidden to the naked eye. Detail scales with the amount of mana used and time. There was a lot to take in from the notifications, and it was all good news. The act of getting the profession made it start at level 1 and applied the stat increases to my body. I already had the highest strength in the camp, and now it got even higher. The profession touched on most of the same stats as my class, and they were starting to dwarf my other stats. With the level from the profession, my strength hit 35, while my intelligence sat in relegation at 9. 1 point away from being 4 times as much. I didn't know the specifics, but it seemed like I was more than 4 times as strong than when I started. I didn't think the points were linear, but more akin to exponential, with each point meaning more than the last. It was yet another example of things we had yet to find out. I could probably test it over time by lifting various things and seeing where the limit was and doing it again 10 points later or something, but I didn't have the time nor the patience to do something like that. I felt stronger and hit harder, and that was enough for me. I could figure out the details after we were out of this tutorial if I wanted to. I relayed all the information to Austin and told him about my new skill and class. He was justifiably jealous and said he couldn't wait to get his profession. I mentioned how it was cruel that the profession starting skill was the one you had to learn to get it. Sense metal was the skill for the mana technique the book walked you through. What profession do you even want? I don't even know which one you are waiting for. I realized I didn't even know which one he wanted to get. I was thinking explorer, to go on grand adventures and stuff. I had always wanted to see the world but never got the chance. Now I could get a profession dedicated to it. You and I contribute the most during the waves, so it should be fine to get a profession that isn't strictly helpful, he said, starting to get a bit passionate. I didn't know if that was the best decision, and getting a profession like that, instead of one that could make something useful, didn't sound the greatest. I told him as much and he just shook his head. This isn't all there is to life, Chris. If all we do is fight or craft for the purpose of fighting, that's a rather grim life. Life is full of wonderful things, and the earth is changing to be even more magical than it already was. Don't you want to go see it and bask in the majesty of the views? Think how good MT Everest is now with magic. With our stats high enough, we could climb to the top with ease. Or with magic equipment, explore the ocean, he said while gesturing with his hands excitedly. He had this gleeful smile on his face, and it looked like he was fantasizing about the future, on all the places he would go. He came down from his musings and said, "Just think of the possibilities." I don't need to think of the possibilities. I need to think about tomorrow and what I need to do to get there, I said back. It didn't matter how wonderful the world was if you didn't live to see it. Oh, don't be a Debbie Downer. Life's no fun if you think like that, he mocked. I knew what he was talking about, and it was usually me making the same point to Abigail all the time. I wasn't one to stew in negativity or focus on the bad. But there were too many things we didn't know, and I would feel better after learning the rules of our new world. If you prepared for all possibilities, you will never be caught off guard, or something like that. I knew there was a famous quote about it, but couldn't think of the exact words. Nope. I'm not letting you ruin this by saying something stupid. Eye on the prize. We are evolving our classes today, and I won't be bogged down by you and your stupid sayings, he said, waving me off. You're the same as your dad. Take it back. That was a grave insult. I was nothing like him. He was old and always had some stupid quote or saying that applied to every situation. We were nothing alike. Make me, he said before running off into the woods like a child. There was no way I was going to stoop to his level. I was above this and wasn't going to engage in his childishness. So that's why I was running after him, for safety, no other reason. It's dangerous to be in the forest alone. We scoured the forest for anything that could help us level up and pass the threshold of level 10. Since we had begun using the forest as our hunting grounds, prey became increasingly rare. It was getting harder and harder to find monsters to fight. We would have to switch up our hunting ground soon enough or venture even further into the forest where the more powerful monsters roamed. It was cutting into the time we could spend fighting and was getting increasingly longer. If we leveled up enough, we could start going into the forbidden territory in the north. Austin and I mowed through most creatures in the forest now, and the evolved beasts were the only thing that gave us even a little bit of a challenge anymore. In the hopes of getting enough experience to level up, we went even further than we usually did and found evolved beasts far more often than not. There were even a few wolves in the forest that started making themselves known this far in. We had fought wolves before, but not ones that had evolved. They were a menace to fight and always took forever, because where there was one, there were more. They always roamed in a pack, and it varied in size from 4 all the way up to over 10. We steered clear of anything with that many and stuck to the smaller packs we could handle without getting too overwhelmed. It was getting near the time we would normally start heading back. But that idea was nowhere in our minds. We were so close, and this pack would push us over the edge. There were 5 of the creatures, and 3 of them were evolved. They were all trotting around and sniffing the air. Their fur was a mix of brown and gray to blend into the surrounding forest, and they came up to about my belt in height and were around 4 feet long. These things could easily kill a level 1 human. We had enough experience to be downwind of them, but they would catch our scent soon, so we had to be quick about it. The alpha was the highest level at 12, and the rest were below that. It would be the most challenging fight we had attempted, and it would see us through to the next level. Hopefully. We had fought multiple enemies before, and there were quite a few times where a boar's squeals would bring over more of its kind that were nearby, but it was never more than 3 at a time. We did what we usually did in situations like these and focused on the weak ones first to begin our attack. The one I targeted went down from a nicely placed javelin through the eye, and Austin ran up and stabbed his target in the throat. My throws had gotten extremely accurate with all the practice and could kill most weaker beasts in one empowered throw. The 3 remaining wolves went into a frenzy at the loss of their own and came charging at us to avenge their fallen pack members. Their growls and barks announced to the world their hostilities. 2 charged at me while the alpha charged at Austin. Fighting 2 evolved beasts at once wasn't the ideal situation to be in, but it was nothing I hadn't done before. I had superior strength and I knew how to use it effectively. One of the hardest things about fighting opponents who were faster than you was actually hitting them. They were quick enough to turn devastating blows into mere grazes, and anything less was dodged outright. It was extremely frustrating, and a great ability to have that would work on most people who didn't focus on speed, like me. The only problem was I had my own annoying speed demon and I fought him regularly. Sparring with Austin gave me extensive experience with fighting enemies like this. I could tank a few bites from them, so being outnumbered wasn't the worst thing in the world. But if I didn't fix that soon, it would start to add up. The first thing I had to do was reduce the space they used to move. It didn't matter how fast you were if you didn't have the space to use it. My new skill excelled at constricting space during a fight, and a well-placed ice wall could be debilitating to an unsuspecting foe. One of the wolves circled behind me while the other snapped at me to keep my attention. Kept eye contact while growling menacingly. Its fur was all spiked up and its hackles were raised. It knew it faced a strong opponent. I don't know why, but that filled me with satisfaction. That the wolves recognized that I was a threat. I knew what they were doing but didn't care to stop it. The one behind me would get in a free attack, but I was willing to pay that price. It happened much like I thought it would, and as the wolf behind me went for its attack, the one in front came in for its own. It was a marvelous pincer move that would defeat most enemies. Well, most besides me. My fortitude boosted by fortified body would make it so the attacks wouldn't be that bad and would only pierce the skin, causing a little bit of damage. Their jaws weren't strong enough to break my bones, and if I had better armor, I could probably ignore it entirely. Since the wolves were kind enough to get up close and personal, I would make them stay that way. After tearing off a chunk of skin and muscle with their sharp teeth, they attempted to back off to get out of my range of attack. They didn't expect to run into a wall made of ice right behind them. Faced with the fact they couldn't get away and my empowered axe coming for their head, there was only one conclusion: death. They didn't have any tricks I hadn't seen before, and I had tricks they didn't expect. Knowing thy enemy and all that. The wolf's head exploded into bits of bone and gore, and the body slumped to the ground. The second wolf used the fact I was focusing on its partner to try to end the fight, but all it managed to do was chomp down on my shoulder. It was painful, but pain was a close friend by this point. If there was pain, that meant I was doing something right. It was almost like déjà vu watching the scene repeat itself, and I had 2 dead wolves at my feet. Austin and the alpha were still fighting, scurrying around each other trying to land attacks without getting hit themselves. Wimps, a little pain isn't that bad. I thought about going to aid him but thought better of it. He would be fine and I wouldn't want him interfering in my fight. It didn't take much longer for him to wrap it up with a well-placed thrust into the chest. After the wolf breathed its last, the battle notifications rolled in. You have slain Forest Wolf, level 8. 64 points earned. You have slain Forest Wolf, level 10. 100 points earned. You have slain Forest Wolf, level 11. 121 points earned. Congratulations. You have leveled up. Ha, I did it. It was with happy smiles and bloodied clothes that Austin and I limped back to camp. Chapter 28, Class Evolution. Austin and I made it back to camp before opening our notifications. We didn't know what the class evolution would do, and we figured being in the safety of the camp was the best bet. For all we knew, it would force us to choose as soon as we opened the screen before knocking us out. It most likely wouldn't be that extreme, but we couldn't help but think of worst-case scenarios and all the ways it could go wrong. We both thought it was a better idea to wait until we got back. We nearly skipped like 2 school kids all the way back because of how excited we were. I had just gotten my profession and now I was evolving my class not 12 hours later. I was in for a huge power boost and I was vibrating with excitement. We made it back to camp quickly and separated into our own lodges to go through the process. I pulled up the notifications to see how to do this thing. Skills available. I guess I needed to pick my final skill before I got to evolve my class. Since this was my last skill, I thought about all the ones I had taken thus far and wondered what kind of evolution they would lead to. The guide in the beginning said that skill choice would affect class evolution, and this was my last chance to nudge it in the right direction. I started with the attack skill Power Strike, then followed with the defensive skill Fortified Body. I then probably screwed up with my next choice of Throwing Mastery. It didn't match any of the others very well, and it went in a different direction than the rest. Identify was next and wasn't that bad of a choice. I think that everyone would probably have it somewhere in their beginning skills, the only difference being when being able to see the level of what you were facing was essential, and anyone that forwent getting it was either dead or quickly remedied that choice. Penetrating Strike was another attacking skill and made that discipline the majority. Strictly counting class skills gave 3 attacking, 1 defensive, and 1 utility. I had to think about whether I wanted to go all in on the attacking side and get a 4th, guaranteeing a class that was related, or evening it out with a 2nd defensive skill. If I really wanted to mess with it, I could get a magic attacking skill to mess up the mix. As funny as that would be, I didn't think that it would lead to the most ideal of evolutions. I also didn't know if the skills I purchased would be factored into the equation. If those were counted, there was another attacking skill and a defensive magic one to think about. They probably were considered, and now I started thinking about how bad of choices I had made. There were so many options to choose from, and now, every choice I made seemed wrong. I got a magic skill because I wanted it, not because I was thinking about future evolutions. I could only hope that it wasn't that bad and it didn't affect things that much. My skill upgrade had to be taken into account, right? Gah! I really wish I knew what I was doing. The not knowing was killing me. I didn't want to go down the same road as Austin with all his attacking skills. I wanted to even it out a little bit. It helped that I felt confident enough in my attacking skills to focus more on defense. Now that I was a blacksmith, I could make myself some armor rather than have Sam do it. Heavy armor proficiency or plate armor proficiency would be good. Shield brace or shield wall are both good, but I didn't know if I was going to keep using the shield. I quite liked Mark's two-handed axe, and I could now make one for myself. Skills that required a shield wouldn't work then. Stone skin was a decent one to have, but I didn't know how well that would work with armor. Would it mess up the fit of the armor? Would it grow over the armor and ruin it? Once again, insufficient knowledge. Fortified Body worked well, and I felt confident enough in it to ignore the active defensive skills to focus more on the passive ones. My eyes kept coming back to heavy armor proficiency. Now that I was a blacksmith, I could create some cool armor. I could make it however I wanted and wouldn't have to worry about it breaking. I could just make it again. It was a decent enough skill, and I think it would mesh well with my other ones to evolve into a decent class. I chose it over plate armor proficiency because I felt the latter was more restricting in what kind of armor I could wear. What if I got armor made out of dragon scales or something and it wasn't considered plate armor? Or other animal parts being made into armor? It was restricting enough that I thought the more generic heavy armor skill would prove more useful in the long run. With the skill selected, a new screen popped up. Class evolution available. I didn't hesitate and immediately opened it up. I was met with 5 class choices to choose from, similar to the first time I had done this. I wonder if it was always 5 to choose from. I began eagerly reading through all of my options. The first was kind of disappointing. Axe Warrior Common. Axe Warriors are an evolution to the common class warrior. They rely on strength and weapon skills to fight. As the name implies, they utilize the axe as their main weapon and can be found using a variety of different ones. They make for formidable frontline fighters, capable of mitigating significant damage. +2 strength, +1 agility, +1 fortitude, +2 endurance, +1 vitality, +1 free points. It looked like a straight-up upgrade of my current class with the addition of using an axe for my main weapon. It gave 8 stat points per level instead of the 6 I currently received. A small increase, but still an increase. The second option wasn't much better. Shield Warrior Common. Shield Warriors are an evolution to the common class warrior. They rely on defensive skill and their shield to fight. As the name implies, they utilize their shield as their main weapon and are used to mitigate a substantial amount of damage. +2 strength, +2 fortitude, +2 endurance, +1 vitality, +1 free points. I dismissed that one instantly. I did not want to be a shield warrior. Axe warrior was still on the table depending on the rest, but it was all around better than this option. Berserker, common. Forgoing the usual armor of warriors, berserkers get more powerful the more they are injured. Similar to barbarians, they utilize fury and ferocity in combat, but that doesn't mean they lack in skill. +2 strength, +1 agility, +2 endurance, +2 vitality, +1 free point. I didn't quite understand how I was offered this one. Yes, my armor was mostly cosmetic by the end there and I was essentially going without, but I had just chosen an armor skill with my last skill option. It must not affect things as much as I thought. This option seemed like it was a wet dream for masochists. I wasn't fond of pain, but I had gotten used to it over the countless fights where it was inevitable. My armor wasn't the best and I managed to get injured a lot during the fights, but that didn't mean I enjoyed it. I put a pin in that one and decided to look at the rest of my options. Arctic Barbarian, uncommon. Barbarians are a common evolution of warrior which uses brute strength and raw fury to excel in combat, instead of the honed skills of a knight or measured strength of a monk. The Arctic Barbarian is a rare variant of barbarian that is commonly found in Arctic regions and has an increased propensity to throw themselves into battle. Requirements: some form of ice or Arctic affinity, at least one ice-based skill, and one uncommon weapon skill. +3 strength, +2 fortitude, +2 endurance, +1 vitality, +2 free points. I smiled at the rarity. The first three were common classes, and at least I now had an uncommon option to choose from. It gave 10 stat points per level instead of the 8 that the commons all gave, which was double the increase from my current class. Reading through it closer, I saw that there were requirements for the class. It seemed like common knowledge that rarer classes would have requirements to unlock them, but I didn't think that it would be that blatant and come out and say it. It said that an affinity was required. Was that what I thought it was? How were we supposed to know what affinity we had? There was no way to tell, and we weren't told when we began the tutorial. Were we supposed to instinctively know what our affinity was? I guess I had an affinity for ice or an Arctic affinity, whatever that meant. I wonder if that was why Austin and I glowed different colors when we were using the same skill. I was a light blue like ice while Austin was a bright yellow. What affinity could that be? I'd seen Earth depicted by the color yellow in games and shows, but it seemed too vibrant to be Earth. Looking at the rest of the requirements, I was glad that I had chosen Ice Wall or I wouldn't have been offered this class. The same went for the skill that I managed to upgrade. I was excited to look at my last option. It had to be either uncommon or greater based on the last one. Iron Guardian, uncommon. Iron Guardians are an uncommon evolution to the common class warrior. They rely on defensive skills and their shield to protect others. They excel at keeping their opponent's attention and making sure nothing can get by them. Requirements: gain most of your experience by protecting others, 1 defensive skill, and 1 armor skill. +2 strength, +2 fortitude, +2 endurance, +2 vitality, +2 free points. My face involuntarily scrunched up at that one. I didn't want to be a tank, and this class was exactly that. It would be perfect if that was what I wanted. I guess it counted me fighting the waves as protecting my family, and that's where I got most of my experience. It didn't seem that hard of a class to unlock, and having a defensive skill and armor skill were easy requirements to meet. I wonder if another class required a taunting skill or something similar. With all of my options read, it seemed easy to pick the one I wanted. Higher rarity was better, and there was only one that fit what I was going for. Iron Guardian was good and all, but it wasn't for me. Arctic Barbarian seemed like an insult to my intelligence, but I think that was the D&D connotations talking. There was no evidence to say that all barbarians were muscleheads. I better keep it secret from Austin or he'll never let it go. There was no way I was going to give him ammunition he could use to make fun of me, and this was one of those things. I could envision it now, all the jokes about low intelligence in my future if I said anything. Choosing the class was similar to the first time that I did it, and I felt the energy moving throughout my body, improving it. I didn't receive a level like the last time I chose a class, so I had no idea why there was the feeling of energy improving my body. As soon as it was finished, I pulled up my status screen to find out what was different. Name, Christopher Zelensky. Race, G. Human. Class, G. Arctic Barbarian. Uncommon, level 10. Profession, G. Novice Blacksmith. Common, level 1. Affinity, Ice. Faction, Zelensky family. Temporary. Strength 39. Agility 19. Perception 13. Fortitude 24. Endurance 28. Vitality 25. Intelligence 11. Wisdom 15. Acumen 11. Free points 1. Laws none. Class skills: heavy blow, uncommon; fortified body, common; throwing weapon proficiency, beginner; identify, common; penetrating strike, common; sweeping slash, common; ice wall, common; heavy armor proficiency, beginner; heavy weapon proficiency, beginner. Profession skills: sense metal, common; coins 0. Points 354. My race upgraded from H to G. My profession had started at G, and I wondered why it was different than classes that started at H. Now I was G rank in all three, and there was a clear improvement because of it. It felt like every part of me was upgraded, and it was stronger than any level up so far. It touched every part of my being and felt euphoric. Comparing my stats revealed that every stat went up by 2. I guess upgrading your race gave a huge boost that I didn't know about. It was the equivalent of 3 levels in stats. My new class also came with a new skill that I didn't get to choose. Heavy weapon proficiency wasn't one I would have picked myself, but it fit the barbarian theme. It was kind of annoying that I didn't get to pick like before, but it wasn't that bad. I had been thinking about using a heavy weapon anyway. Now that my affinity had been revealed, it was added to my status sheet. It felt counterintuitive to only add it to the sheet after I knew that I had one, but there was nothing I could do to change it. At least it told me which one I had. After looking over the changes, I was bursting with energy, and I felt better than I ever had with the improvements done to my body. I was ready for a day of forging to gain even more levels. Chapter 29: Clueless Apes. The first action I had to do after evolving was to get to work fixing everyone's gear. Now that I was a blacksmith, I had to service all the gear and make sure it was up to snuff. I took the time to walk Vinny through how I got the class and watched over him for a couple of hours until he unlocked it. Now that there were 2 of us, work would go a lot faster. Fixing everyone's weapons was a lot harder than anticipated. Some weren't that bad and were barely used, only requiring a grind down and sharpen, while some would have to be reforged completely. Mark's battle axe was near scrap metal by this point. Getting the profession didn't make us master blacksmiths, and there were still major learning curves to figure out. But Vinny and I were getting the hang of it. I used some of my personal points to buy some more tools we needed and got specific oil used for quenching. I had no way to tell how much better it made the weapon, as everything we made was labeled crude by the system. When I used Identify on the knife that got me my profession, it said, "Crude iron knife." All of our starting weapons were the same and had the crude label. I didn't know what it would take to go above that, and we tried to make them the best we could with what we knew. It took a few days to service all the weapons, and the 8th wave came in that time. There wasn't anything of note during the wave, and we got through it without any major problem. My new class was a blast to use, and it had me mowing through the enemies. The increase in stats from my evolution and 2 levels in blacksmith really proved themselves. Austin was the same way. He didn't tell me what he picked, but whatever it was devastating. We didn't tell each other our classes, but I did manage to get his affinity out of him. He had the solar affinity. I guess my joke about the sunflower was more truthful than I thought it was. As soon as he told me, I refused to use his name anymore. If I had to get his attention, I would call him my little ray of sunshine. I thought it was hilarious. He did not. I asked what the difference is between a solar affinity and a light affinity, and he didn't know. It was the same with me not knowing the difference between an Arctic and ice affinity. Everyone knew we had evolved and revealed that they knew for a while now. There were some who even made bets on when. The bastards. In hindsight, we were pretty dumb to think that we could hide it and our levels were a dead giveaway. Now that the cat was out of the bag, we could start bringing back the bodies of what we hunted. Armor made from the thick boar's hide would be a lot better than the leather we had lying around camp. especially the evolved boars, or other tools made from the bones and tusks. It added to the travel time while hunting, but it wasn't that bad. Our increased strength made the weight manageable, and it wasn't like we were bringing all the meat back. The secret now out, we had to give up half our points from hunting. We had been keeping all of the points previously since we wanted to hide what we were doing, but now that everyone knew, we had to give them up. People were shocked at the amount of points we had. We were hunting level 10 plus animals, and each one was worth over 100 points. How many did they think we had? Giving up our points couldn't have come at a worse time too. I didn't know whether the evolution caused it or the fact I had already purchased 2 skills, but now all the skills cost a lot more. Instead of the 1,000 points they used to cost, it was now 5 times more. It was extremely frustrating, and I thought it was an error when I first saw it. I guess they didn't want people buying whatever they wanted. Being able to kill a dozen or so beasts and get a skill was kind of overpowered, but it was still aggravating for it to change. The new price tag wasn't that unfeasible, but what if it increased again? The 8th wave brought an influx of points, and we finally purchased the Alchemist book. Now that all the essentials had been purchased, we were saving up for the information about the multiverse book next. That was highly anticipated, and we all wanted to gain more information about our new world. Austin and I had revealed our affinities, and we all wondered what other abilities were hidden from us. The days continued, and my routine stayed the same. Hunt in the morning, blacksmithing until dinner. Then magic practice and training until it was time to go to bed. Blacksmithing work strained my magic stats a lot and was a great way to increase wisdom and acumen, but fell short for intelligence. I didn't have to maintain sense metal the entire time now that I got the profession, but the book said that it would help improve the final product. Something about saturating it in mana throughout the crafting process helped increase its final grade or something. I still didn't understand it fully, but I used it as a great way to train. The constant use of mana helped increase wisdom, and the constant need to replenish it increased acumen. The precise detail work helped train agility. That left only 2 stats that I had to train separately so they wouldn't fall behind: intelligence and perception. They could be trained at the same time, which was great for efficiency's sake. Intelligence training involved a lot of mana manipulation and attempting to make your mana more concentrated. It was tedious and repetitive work that got annoying fast. Perception training was focused more on the spiritual side and was used to sense the mana you were manipulating along with the changes in it. After my evolution, it was easier to sense, but it was still not my best trait. I might have to conclude that I just wasn't magically gifted. The 9th wave came and went, and we finally had enough points for Introduction to the Multiverse. It was a surprise, to say the least. We all gathered expecting a book to appear after we purchased it. Instead of a book appearing, a humanoid creature flashed into existence. Before we got a chance to comprehend what was happening, the thing shouted out in a cheerful voice. "Hello? Thank you for choosing Introduction to the Multiverse. I will be your instructor, Sipterus." All of us jumped at the sudden voice, and I even had my new axe in my hand, ready in case it attacked. After fixing everyone's gear, I had the time to make myself a new weapon, and she was a beauty. I had Scott carve a handle from the toughest wood we could buy from the store, and I picked the best iron I could afford to use for the axe head. I still hadn't gotten the hang of making good quality steel yet, so I had to settle for iron, but it was still a monstrous two-hander, and it had the weight to prove it. I had gotten rid of my shield and gone full into the heavy weapon since acquiring the skill. It made it so I got injured more frequently, but it was nothing that I couldn't handle. The feeling of slicing through monsters in one powerful blow still brought a smile to my face. When it connected, it was devastating. I thought about naming it, but figured I would name it when I made it better out of steel. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Granddad was the first to respond to the new creature. We were all staring at the creature now and on guard should it move aggressively. It was relatively the same height as us, over 5.5 feet tall, and it looked mostly humanoid, bipedal with 2 arms and legs. That was where the similarities ended. It had green skin with blue accents on its arms and face. Its body was covered by a strange set of clothes, but its 2 sets of eyes were what stood out. I half expected it to have wings or something. "I am to be your instructor in teaching you the ways of the multiverse. Throughout hundreds of integrations, the system has learned that a more personal touch is best to make sure things are learned correctly," it said matter-of-factly. I didn't know whether to take that as an insult or not. Was it calling us dumb? That isn't to say anything negative about you. It just means more information is retained through this medium of learning. It also helps the newly integrated voice their questions. Sipterus said, "As for what I am doing here, well, that's rather obvious. I'm here to teach you. As your settlement pylon is only at the outpost level, this cabin will have to do. Unfortunately." It continued while looking at the dull surroundings. We had put up some new furniture Scott had made, but there wasn't anything on the walls. Decorations were a waste of points, and the room was a reflection of that. All of us were too dumbfounded to speak. The last thing we expected was a creature to appear in our cabin to be our teacher. "What are you going to teach us?" Couldn't help but ask. "Good question, human. Most of the basics and requirements to level up, along with the various things you need to know to evolve effectively. Now, there are some things that the Great System will restrict me from saying, so if I cannot answer a question, that is why." Sipterus answered. "I didn't think that I'd ever been referred to as human before. That was such an odd thing to be referred to by. Yes, I was a human, but it felt weird being called one." Austin leaned over and said, "How did it know you were human? How was I supposed to know that? It wasn't like I told the thing. Humans are a common species in the multiverse and are not that hard to find. I myself have met many humans throughout my life. You are not special. Plus, I was told who I would be teaching to keep what I told you applicable. It wouldn't be helpful to teach an elemental race about human tendencies now, would it?" Its cheerful voice was getting to me. Why was the thing so happy? It sounded like an overexcited kindergarten teacher with the way it spoke. I certainly wasn't going to say anything, but it was certainly off-putting. "Are there any other questions before we get started?" it said while clapping its hands. Now that my attention was brought to them, I noticed that they weren't quite right. There was a webbing that connected every finger, and each one was longer than it should be. It looked more like a fin than a hand. None good. Now, before we start, I should note that I cannot reveal any information about the tutorial you are in or information about any other newly integrated not in this tutorial. So no questions about that. Secondly, I cannot do anything for you. My body isn't actually here, and this is just a projection of it, so I can't fight nor make anything for you," it said promptly. None of us knew what to do with that, so we just nodded absently. The thing took that as acknowledgement and continued. "Good. Now to begin, what is leveling?" I didn't know what the alien was expecting, but blank stares must not have been it. "Seriously, nothing? What have you guys been doing this whole time? I can see that you have all leveled before." It lost some of its cheerfulness the longer the silence continued. "We get experience from killing things and level up when we get enough," Hal said back like it was common sense. The alien did not like that answer and narrowed its eyes onto Hal. "You gain experience? That's what you think happens? What about the transfer of essence? Or the enrichment of the soul? Have you just been murdering anything you could find?" It seemed the alien was getting worked up. "Oh dear honored mother, help me. These apes are clueless." Chapter 30, Back in School. "Tell me what you know of essence. I guess we should start there," the alien said begrudgingly. He was met with the same blank stares as before. "You've got to be kidding me. You're telling me you don't even know what essence is?" Exasperation was clearly getting the better of the thing. "Is it the experience that levels us up?" Mark said. For a shot in the dark, it wasn't that bad of a guess. I had no idea what the alien was getting at and had no better idea to throw out there. "Sigh, yes, it is what levels you up. I mean, do you know what it is?" The alien almost seemed defeated by this point. "I think it would be better if you explained it like we knew nothing. There was no essence or mana or magic before this great system kidnapped us," I said with implied air quotes about this so-called great system. Sensing the Q&A going nowhere fast, I thought to expedite the process. The alien had a sharp intake of breath and quickly muttered something under his breath. "Do not so casually blaspheme in the presence of the great system. Many cultures would kill you where you stand just for thinking that," Sipterus said gravely. I didn't know how true that statement was, but for the sake of not upsetting the alien, I apologized. It wouldn't be good to have the teacher mad at me. I did enough of that in school and it never ended well. It took a moment for Cypterus to gather himself before he refocused on the task at hand. I'm gathering that you originated from a world devoid of essence and mana. Yes? No magic of any kind, Cypterus said. When everyone nodded to his question, he seemed relieved. Ignorance I can fix, stupidity not so much. Essence is the fundamental energy of the world, and it governs everything in existence. Mana is birthed from essence, and everything produces small amounts of it. Your planet must be so new that it had yet to begin producing it in large quantities for you to absorb. I wouldn't call millions of years new, but what did I know? Essence, ether, energy of the heaven and earth, all names for the same thing. Different cultures call it different things, but it is most widely known as essence. Every living creature uses essence to improve themselves in some way, from insects and beasts to all sentient life. Like me and you, he said. You passively accumulate essence without consciously having to do it when it is present in the world, and everything in existence has some of it. Your world, as young as it is, still had a small amount of it, as do you. It's just too small to be expressed in any way. Now that you know what essence is, the next step is what you do with it. To gain a level, you must accumulate a certain amount of essence in your soul, be it from taking it from others by killing them, transferring the essence, or absorbing it from an outside source. Do note that your soul can only hold so much essence before it is full. So there is a maximum level that you can reach. It's akin to a well. Your soul is the well, and it can only hold so much water. Water being the maximum level it can hold. The way to increase this maximum is to dig a deeper well or enrich your soul. This is done in various ways, but just know that it happens naturally over time. Everything you do slowly grows the well that is your soul. Every interaction, every battle, even just living. Every action improves the well a different amount, and it varies from person to person. A pacifist won't get as big an improvement from battle as a warrior will. Now enough about that. You now have the essence. What do you do with it? You then use it to improve yourself in some way, i.e. stat points. It was all making sense so far. If you count universal energy accumulation and soul wells as making sense. You gain essence and then use it to increase your stat points. Easy. Wait, we didn't use it to increase our stats. The system does it for us. It seemed others started coming to the same conclusion that I had and scrunched up their faces in confusion. Ah, I see you've caught my error. Good. Yes, I am aware that the system is currently taking care of that part for you, and if you're lucky, it will continue to do so, Cypterus said. The great system above all else is fair. It will not pamper you and hold your hand as you progress through the ranks. You must prove you are worthy of its help. There are certain requirements that must be met to keep the great system's assistance, and there are 3 ways to prove yourself worthy. Those being the 3 ways to improve yourself besides leveling. I won't get into the specifics because that's a long way off for most of you, as the first bottleneck tier is advancing to rank E. While it is pointless to tell you the requirements now, it's not pointless to inform you of the 3 ways to gain power. Maybe some of you will attain them early. Mind, body, and spirit make up all of what you are outside of your soul, and they are the very same paths to power. Mind refers to enlightenment or comprehension based on how you look at it. As you have probably seen on your status sheets, this refers to laws. There are myriad different laws that govern existence, and you have comprehended none. That is why that section is blank. Some hands shot up like everyone was back in grade school and they had to ask a question. Now before you ask, no, I cannot help you gain enlightenment. My job is just to tell you that it's a possibility. Laws range from the elemental laws of water and fire, all the way to more esoteric laws of karma and fortune. Karma is real. Body, the easiest of the 3. Not saying that it's easy to improve, but it's more commonly improved than the other 2. Body has the most widely known methods of improvement, but they all boil down to 2 main ways: mana cultivation and body refinement. I didn't know what either of those were, but the alien didn't seem to care and went straight on to the 3rd path. Spirit is the hardest of the 3 to improve, and it's also the most personal, having the most differences from person to person. It is also the most powerful of the 3, the only drawback being it has the fewest levels of advancement, or realms if you want to call it that. The alien muttered the last bit like calling it a realm was wrong. Now, while the great system will let me tell you that, it won't let me expand on it. It gets a bit touchy about the newly integrated after the failed integration. What? Why? That doesn't help us any if you don't tell us what they are. Granddad voiced his complaint. That's precisely the point. It wants to test you and see what you are capable of without undue outside interference. The only reason it lets me tell you this much is so you know that the option is there. It's not so much of leading a horse to water as it is showing the horse water exists. The alien went on to inform us of various other things that were considered basic, like what settlement pylons were and the different levels they had to all the ranking there were for humans. There were 8 ranks all the way up to godhood. G-F-E-D-C-B-A-S. H wasn't included in that list because only species from worlds without essence started at H. Like us. Apparently, that's why we increased stats through training so quickly. It was our bodies adapting to the essence and mana in the air that improved it so quickly. Sipterus said you could still improve stats with training in later tiers, but it was seen as a waste of time by most and time was better spent elsewhere. Affinities were a thing that everyone had, and some even had more than one. They could range from a specific element like wind or water, or could be more broad like weather or storm. Having a storm affinity meant any skill that involved water, wind, or lightning was empowered compared to just one element. It was more rare to have that kind of affinity and most just had a single element. Sipterus even said that it was possible to attain more, but it was extremely expensive and reserved for the elite who worked for rich powers. There was more that was talked about, but it was so much it started to hurt my head. I knew Abigail was absorbing this like a sponge, so if there was something I didn't know, I could ask her. The class went on for a few hours, and it was probably the best 20,000 points ever spent. Even after the apocalypse, I found myself back in class. It was a lot of information to get through, and some of it was extremely helpful. It took 25 days, but we finally got some of the answers we were waiting for.